So it's time to get to work. And you're going to be reading a lot in this class. A lot of times you'll be reading on your own. And you will be reading primary sources and secondary sources. That's what historians use to put together information, to put together an analysis of the time that they're studying. Primary sources. What are primary? Primary sources are sources written by people living in the times, or perhaps they are works of art. Perhaps they're a building. Perhaps they're a piece of music. Depends on where your research takes you and where your interests take you, right? So primary sources are sources written by, created by, the people we are studying, the people of the time period. So Shakespeare's plays, primary. The archaeology around London, how do we view London? You have this map of London that I've shown you. That's a primary source in that it tries to give you the lay of the land at the time. Yeah? So primary sources. Primary sources are those sources created by the people or the individuals, the groups that we're looking at in any particular time period. Secondary sources. Secondary sources are those sources written by historians, economists, politicians, whoever they may be, when they use primary sources themselves and try to make sense of them, try to make some kind of analysis, try to retell the story, perhaps, and so that it makes sense for us. So, in that regard, the editors for your play Antigone, you'll have an introduction there, you'll have some other, depending on which version of the play you purchased, you'll have an introduction, you may have some notes. Those are secondary. Those are written by the people who are presenting the primary source to you. Keith Hopkins is going to talk to you about gladiator games. And in gladiator games, we have images of gladiators. We have primary sources written by people who went to the gladiator games, spectators' reports, if you will. And those are primary. But Keith Hopkins' discussion, his analysis, his storytelling, his version of what gladiator games mean to a society, that's secondary. You also have, for example, Ivor Miller. Ivor Miller is writing about graffiti in New York. While the art that he'll show you, the interviews he'll do with the actual people who did the graffiti in New York, that's primary. What Ivor Miller makes of it, his analysis of it, that's secondary. Yeah? So that's what we're going to be looking at in this little video, primary and secondary sources. You need to know the difference between the two. And the first primary source that we're going to focus on is Valerie Warrior's selection. You have a PDF at Blackboard, I think under folder 2, right? You have a PDF, it's called Warrior's Greek Religion, a source book. So let's get going.